Thank you, Maria, there. Thank you, Maria, for giving us those updates. Now we move over to Africa, where Egypt has become the latest symbol of the distress gripping poorer nations on the back of surging inflation, rising yields, and the grinding down of global growth. The probability its government will fail to repay debts in the 1 year has surged to the highest since 2013 and to the region's worst, and that has sent the pound, as the Egyptian pound, to its weakest since the 2016 surprise devaluation. Patrick Curran joins me from London to discuss this. Hi, Patrick. How are you doing today? Patrick, a debt default is looming for Egypt. Can you tell us what lies ahead for the economy if this eventually happens?
Sure. So I should start by saying that our base case is that Egypt will be able to do what it takes to avoid default, but is going to have to walk a tightrope to avoid a crisis. Public debt is about 95% of GDP, and interest payments right now are eating up about half of government revenue, meaning there's very little margin for error. Even more concerning, in our view, is external financing needs. So the sum of their current account deficit and external principal payments due over the next year are equal to about $45 billion, which is 10% of GDP and 1.5 times their existing reserve stock, which is amongst the highest of all emerging markets. If Egypt is able to deliver on its fiscal reform plans and set debt on a downward path and finds a way to meet its large external financing needs, then a default can be avoided in the near term. But it's going to be a very difficult path for sure.
You mentioned that Egypt does need to secure external financing, but does this mean further devaluation of its currency, given surging inflation, especially globally and in Africa?
Yeah, we think further FX flexibility is really necessary to avoid a crisis here. It will help rein in imports, attract new investment inflows, and perhaps most importantly, secure an IMF program. All of which are necessary to stabilize its falling reserve stock and prevent a crisis. They did devalue their currency by 15% in March, which helped to clear some of the pent-up imbalances. But we estimate that the pound is still about 10 to 15% overvalued. The central bank has continued to keep it trading within a relatively tight band, and we think more depreciation is necessary to prevent external imbalances from building back up and reserves from falling to unsustainable levels. Alongside devaluation, I think tighter monetary policy would also be helpful to help rein in demand and reduce pressure on the currency.
So if you're thinking devaluation is the way to go, I think it's going to affect the Egyptians. We think it's going to affect the Egyptians' currency and not good for the economy. What other way do you think the government can do, or what other measures do you think the government can take to avoid, this crisis that's looming?
Sure, I think exchange rate flexibility is probably the most important one alongside monetary policy tightening. But they do have fairly ambitious fiscal consolidation plans, which should see debt falling to below 80% of GDP over the medium term, which also, while painful in the near term, is essential to help make sure its debt stock remains sustainable. So it's really a three-part policy approach here, where they need to focus on tighter fiscal and monetary policy as well as greater exchange rate flexibility. All of which, no doubt, will be painful in the near term, but I think will serve the economy well as we move into the future. Over the longer term, though, I think the focus needs to be more clearly on the difficult structural reforms to reduce the state and military's dominance of the economy and foster a better environment for private sector growth and investment. The privatization drive they've discussed lately, I think, is a step in the right direction and will help bring in some funding this year. I think the government is targeting about $10 billion of inflows. But more is really needed, and we've seen little evidence so far of a more meaningful shift to a private sector-driven growth model, which is essential for Egypt's growth to be sustainable over the longer term.
Thank you so much, Patrick Curran, senior economist at Telema, for joining us on today's program and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you all.